Earlier this week, Israel presented a number of scenarios under which they would strike Iran, specifically its nuclear facilities, in an attempt, in their own words, to stop Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons.
Israel is apparently setting aside funds for attacking Iran. How much money are we talking about? Around $1.5 billion.
Now, the United States and Israel have been going through many back and forths with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran has responded to many of the Israeli threats, including one which came in October, when Israel claimed it was training its air force for strikes on Iran. Iran then threatened Israel, claiming that there was a bank of targets that they had ready to hit, even releasing maps which showed many different targets across Israel, which the Iranians believed they could successfully hit. And for Israel, unlike the United States, this situation is not going to be solved by the JCPOA or Iran nuclear deal being revived by the Americans, the Europeans, and the Iranians, because for Israel, they see the JCPOA as being a fundamentally flawed deal under which Iran would still produce a nuclear weapon, although there is no proof that there is an Iranian nuclear weapons program as claimed by Israel. Israel has been at the forefront for the past 30 years of predicting when Iran will have its alleged nuclear weapon.
This is a bomb. This is a fuse.
Earlier this year, in fact, Israel's top general, Aviv Kochavi, predicted that Iran would have nuclear weapons capabilities within months, maybe even weeks, he said. That has again been revised by Israel with new predictions about 5 years tops, according to Avigdor Lieberman. But despite Israel's tough rhetoric about striking Iran's nuclear facilities and perhaps from there creating a regional war, Israel is very unlikely to go through with the attacks over nuclear weapons. This is not only due to the sheer hypocrisy of Israel going after another state which does not have nuclear weapons, threatening war against them and attempting to get the number one superpower on the planet to go to war with that foreign country over nuclear weapons when it itself keeps nuclear weapons secretly. It does not confirm or deny it has them. However, it's an open secret that Israel has between 80 to 300 plus nuclear weapons and has not signed on to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty itself.
A yes-no question for you. Does Israel have nuclear capabilities and nuclear weapons? Yes or no?
We've always said that we won't be the first to introduce it, so we haven't introduced it.
But that's not an answer to the question.
The real reason that Israel is not likely to start a direct war with Iran by striking it is because of the fact that Israel understands that it doesn't have the slightest chance of winning that war. Not only will Iran attack facilities inside of Israel, including its military facilities which are open and all of its enemies know where they are located, Iran has openly been conducting exercises under which they are attacking targets which resemble Dimona, Israel's nuclear reactor. And Israel knows that it is surrounded by enemies such as Hezbollah, the Syrian government, the groups which are active in Iraq currently. On top of that, those in Yemen, the Ansar Allah or Houthi rebels as they're often called, and the Palestinians inside of the Gaza Strip, and also those in the West Bank who would launch armed resistance in the event that any regional war would take place. It's a disaster scenario for Israel. And so for them to launch strikes at Iran at this time without the backing of the United States would be essentially national suicide. Instead, it's more likely, as has been suggested by Israel's military, that they will continue to fight Iran, as they call it, through Syria by striking targets inside of Syria, such as weapons depots, the Syrian air defense sites, and the primary port of Latakia and other areas inside of Syria where they claim that Iranian weapons and armed groups which are backed by the Islamic Republic operate without any evidence.
The port of Latakia is in the west of the country and handles most of Syria's imports. This is the second reported Israeli airstrike there this month.
But Israel does not need evidence to back up its strikes on Syrian territory, killing Syrian civilians and soldiers alike, just like it doesn't need evidence to try and influence Washington's policy on the Iran nuclear deal. And with the approval of more illegal settler units inside of the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, Israel is more likely on the way to an escalation with Syria than it is with Iran.